Welcome, everybody, to the first edition of Streets for All Happy Hour for 2023. At the risk of pissing off Larry David, Happy New Year to everybody. We're very excited to have Councilmember Raman on with us as a returning Happy Hour guest. We first spoke with her when she was first elected 2 years ago. Before we get to our conversation with the Councilmember, a few quick updates on neighborhood council elections, an effort to modify the Brown Act, a quick new exciting project called San Vicente Park, an update on ADEM elections, and a few wins and fails. And our icebreaker this month is, what transportation project would you be most excited about in CD4? So I'm going to turn it over to Kyle, who's going to talk about neighborhood council elections and give us and answer that question. Kyle.
Thanks, Michael. So in CD4, I think I'm excited about how the Sepulveda Transit Corridor is going to land there with all the community input. Really hoping to see something that leads to an integrated system and builds the case for ridership and checks all the boxes that we as an organization are looking for. We've talked enough about that, so you all know all that stuff. So I'm happy to talk about, as always, neighborhood council elections. This is an ongoing process throughout the year. It's the closest form of government to the people. As you all may know, there are 99 of them citywide. They get a little bit of money and they talk about real issues, bus and bike lanes. We need more progressives on them. And what we want to highlight this go around on the next slide is the timeline. So for regions 9, 11, and 12, we have deadlines this month to apply to run. For region 11, the deadline was actually yesterday. So hopefully you got your stuff in there if you are running for neighborhood council in that region, in those neighborhoods. But we still have upcoming deadlines for 9 and 12. But feel free to head to the website to check out the entire timeline for all the regions, see exactly where you live. And of course, we'll keep you posted on the filing timelines and everything associated with each happy hour. And next, I'll kick it back to Michael.
Thanks, Kyle. My CD4 wish list project would probably be the Cahuenga Pass. It's going to be repaved in the next fiscal year, and it could be the first safe bike lane between the valley and the city. So hoping we can get that in. So first of all, what is the Brown Act? The Brown Act is California's sunshine law, and it essentially says that any public meeting of any government agency has to be properly agendized, open to the public, et cetera, et cetera. Neighborhood councils fall under it. And when COVID first hit, under the governor's emergency order, neighborhood councils were allowed to meet virtually via Zoom. But the emergency order is expiring at the end of February. And that means that all neighborhood councils are going to be forced back to in-person meetings and lose the ability to meet virtually. We saw an explosion of local democracy with virtual meetings, and we think that neighborhood councils need to stay, or at least need to have the option to stay virtual permanently. So we're working on an effort at the state level to modify the Brown Act specific to Los Angeles and neighborhood councils to let them continue to meet virtually. And then there's an effort at the city level that was introduced yesterday. We first sent this letter that was signed by over 30 neighborhood councils to the city council and the mayor. And yesterday, a resolution was introduced that would support the state legislation. So we're thankful to Councilmember Soto Martinez and Lee and excited about this effort, and hopefully we'll get it done quickly. Next up is San Vicente Park. So this is a new exciting project that we did not conceive, but we're supporting. And it would be a beautiful linear park along San Vicente, which used to be a streetcar route. It would provide massive new park space, walking paths, jogging paths, bike lanes, and traffic calming along one of LA's widest streets. So we can let you know how to get involved and how to support it. But this is the first hot off the presses sneak peek of San Vicente Park, and we're excited about it. Now over to Olga to talk about ADEMs.
Hey, everybody. Some of you may have heard of ADEMs. Most people do not know what it is. Basically, California, obviously, most people are Democrats. more than any other state at least. And we have this system here where the state Democratic Party has hundreds of delegates who are volunteers that help vote on policy priorities, state level endorsements, and things like that. So every 2 years, there's elections for about a third of these delegates. They're called ADEM delegates. And each district you can vote for up to 14 people to represent you at the state level. If you go to the next slide, we are happy to announce that we have created an ADEM's voting guide because it's very hard to find information about most of the people running. If you have never heard of this, please consider checking out the guide and voting for people in your district. There's a lot of really good transit advocates running. It's a really good opportunity to influence state policy. And I'll go ahead and drop the link in the chat in just a sec. And I'll pass it back over to Adrian.
Thank you, Olga. The CD4 project I think I'm most excited about is seeing hopefully more of Griffith Park become car-free. I love that a portion of it recently became car-free, and I think that this will allow more people to actually enjoy the park for what it is instead of using it for a cut-through. So I am going to talk about one of our wins of the month, Venice Boulevard for All. This is one of our very first initiatives that Streets for All took on. This is a really exciting project that's going to turn Venice Boulevard into a complete street. The section in Palms is already under construction and underway. If you want more information on the project, you can visit LA.dot.livablestreets.org, the web link that's on the screen right there. And here we have a diagram of what kind of work is going to be implemented on Venice Boulevard. So a lot of great stuff there: protected bike lanes, bus lanes, and pedestrian enhancements as well. Work is underway. It's currently being repaved, and so we should expect to see this new infrastructure soon. And I'm going to toss it back to Michael to give a Ballona Creek update.
Thanks, Adrian. So we've been working on this for more than 2 years. This is an effort to extend the Ballona Creek bike path from Sid Cronenthal Park in Culver City, where the path currently ends, to Venice and Cochran, where the creek ends. And the update is that the Pico Neighborhood Council passed a letter of support. So we now have the City of Culver City, the West Side Cities COG, all the relevant neighborhood councils, and Holly Mitchell on board. And hopefully in the next couple of weeks, you might see a motion at City Council directing BOE to actually move forward on a feasibility study. So it's been a long time coming, but exciting progress on this project. Passing it over to Josh.
Thanks, Michael. I'm excited to announce that we have a new website. We've done a lot of growing up over the last year with the ballot measure, more staff and better funding. So it makes sense to have a website that reflects that. If you go to the next slide, we've made it easier to use. It should look a little nicer. Our initiatives are better organized, so now you can sort them by different categories and tags. So if there's a project you're interested in, it should be easier to find. We also have much better Spanish translations. So every page is translated, and then we also have a blog and some other fun projects coming soon. And now I think it's going to Jenny.
Hi, everyone. Michael, do you want to introduce
I'll do Mark, and then, yeah. So we're really excited to announce 2 new steering committee members. Mark Vuksevich, who is the co-director of our state team and a full-time staff member, has been appointed to the steering committee. He couldn't be here tonight, but we're so excited. He was instrumental and is instrumental in our state work, along with Bubba Fish, the other co-director. And someone who used to be on the steering committee and left and came back. Jenny, would love you to introduce yourself or reintroduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jenny Moretaya, and I currently live in Echo Park. About 10 years ago or so, I joined a group called Walk Bike Glendale when I lived in that area, and I've pretty much I plugged into the advocacy world since then. It started with bike, then moved to transit, and now a little bit of everything, including walking. I am planning to apply to grad school for a master's in urban planning, and I'm looking forward to make our streets safer for the diverse people in our communities. And I'm really ecstatic to be a part of Streets for All again. So passing it back to Michael.
Thanks, Jenny. Welcome home. As always, you can find us on social media at Streets for All. You can volunteer, donate, or subscribe at streetsforall.org/get-involved. A reminder about our merch store, including kid sizes. And now to our special guest. We're so excited to have Nithya back on after 2 years. She's the mother of 7-year-old twins. They were 5 years old last time we did this. An urban planner, co-founder of homeless services nonprofit SELA, former executive director of Time's Up Entertainment, and of course, council member for Council District 4. She ran for office on a platform delivering compassionate and effective services for people experiencing homelessness, building more affordable housing, moving faster to meet our city's climate goals. And she really won an historic victory. She was the first person to defeat an incumbent in 18 years. I think I have that right. And
Yeah.
since
And
yeah?
the person who did that before me was Antonio Villaraigosa.
Okay,
So yeah,
it's been a
feel
minute.
and he was not a newcomer. So I feel like coming to this as a total political outsider, particularly now being on the inside here, I'm like, oh wow, yeah, okay.
But look what you started. Since then, 2 more incumbents have lost. So you've started a trend that is pushing our city in the right direction. I'm going to pass it over to Alex Contreras, who's going to ask our first question.
Hi, Nithya. Thanks for being here. So you've been in office for 2 years now, and you've had some great wins and also some challenges. We would like to give you space to reflect on your first 2 years in office. What was harder than you had imagined, and what was easier? And thinking on that, what would your top 2 priorities be for the second half of your term?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think, so I ran on this platform of thinking about policy more, kind of more in a more granular fashion than I think other city council candidates that I had heard of in the past talking about. I talked about really specific reforms on housing, on tenant protections, on transportation, on all kinds of things. And I was really excited when I came into this role to put some of those ideas into practice. And I think I was really surprised by the lack of capacity in the city at this moment to put changes into practice. And how much of the work of being in this role is actually not legislative. It doesn't happen in the chambers. And it actually happens when you are following up with departments, when you're working with them on ensuring that their reports come back in a timely fashion, when you're following up with them to make sure that the new positions that you fought for and advocated for in the budget process actually get hired and filled, and that those positions are hired with the right people and that they're actually able to do the work that you intended them to do. All of that is in many ways a much bigger challenge that the city needs to take on in order for us to be able to achieve the very ambitious goals that I have for us and that I know many of you share. I think in the past, when we've responded to recession, so in the 2008 recession and now at the beginning of the pandemic, the city responded in ways that I think actually diminished our capacity to do work. So in the 2008 recession, the city laid off a huge number of its staff, and even today still has not gone back to the level of staffing that they had at that time for almost every single department. Rec and Parks, for example, is a primary example. They have about 2/3 of the staff that they did pre-2008 recession. And so working with a diminished staff in many ways on more challenging issues than they were facing 10, 15, 20 years ago, that's a huge problem that we have to take on. And at the beginning of the pandemic, they did this thing called the SIP program, an early retirement program. And so what ended up happening was that not only do we have fewer staff members to be able to take on some of these challenges, but then we also incentivize the people who had the most knowledge of how to navigate a very, very complicated system to leave. And so we've done that over and over again at the city. And I think one of the things that I want to take on as I look ahead, and we can talk about specific transportation projects or things like that as well, but I really want to think about the city, of taking on city capacity as one of the major challenges that we have going forward, and thinking about how to bring more people in to thinking about city capacity and building city capacity and investing in city capacity as a focus of my work going forward.
That sounds like a great overall description of the challenges. Do you want to elaborate on maybe what was easier than you thought it would be for the first 2 years?
Oh, nothing.
If anything?
It was all very challenging. I had the craziest first 2-year experience. I came in pre-vaccine COVID. I didn't get a lot of outreach from departments. The city hall was empty. I didn't even come into my offices. I didn't meet Andrea here, who's my chief of staff. I didn't meet her in person until like 5 months after I had hired her and we were working together. I mean, that's like a wild way to start in office. We were potentially staring at $1 billion budget deficit, and we couldn't do anything. And then it was only over, I would say, you know what? Okay, I do have an answer for you. What was easier? My second year was much easier than my first. And I didn't expect that things would get so much better, but they did. And I'm looking forward to an even better next 2 years.
That's awesome. I'm going to pass off the next question to Kyle. Thank you again, Nithya.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. So Nithya, let's dig into one of those wild things. We watched the redistricting process play out with a sense of frustration, as I imagine you did as well, especially now that we know what was being said and done behind the scenes. So your district, of course, was redrawn the most dramatically out of any of them. So how has this impacted your work, and what opportunities do you think this could bring for change in how the entire redistricting process is done in the future?
So obviously, yes. I mean, I think it was a very, very frustrating experience to be a part of and to be involved with. I think the tapes were shocking. What was said on the tapes was shocking and distasteful. Racism and homophobia, all of that, I've spoken on that at length. It's horrific. But what was said specifically about redistricting was shocking, but not surprising, given our experience of it, right? But I think that, and we fought for the district that elected me. I loved my neighborhoods. I loved my mid-city neighborhoods. I loved my Koreatown neighborhoods. I loved my Hollywood neighborhoods, and I lost a lot of them, and really moved, further north and much more into the valley. But the reality is that I love my new neighborhoods too. They're incredible. I now have a significant amount of contiguous geography that I think helps us to bring resources to the district in a new way and to think about projects in ways that potentially bring us economies of scale. So I have, I think, 10 straight miles of Ventura Boulevard in the district now, which is great. So we can think about advocating for transportation infrastructure there and support for small businesses there and other kinds of interventions there that I think we can bring along the entire boulevard. I have 19 miles of the river, either one side or both sides. And so in thinking through trying to look for active transportation money from the state, we're able to advocate for that as a representative of the river as a whole, and thinking through what role does the river play in our broader kind of transportation networks and how we think about getting around the city. I'm now the only bridge district between the valley and the central city, right? So I have Northern Silver Lake and I have Los Feliz, and then I have a huge chunk of the Hollywood Hills, and then I have Studio City, Sherman Oaks, Encino, and about half of Reseda. So I feel particularly a responsibility to think about how people travel between one part of the city to another. How do people get from the valley to the basin? And I think having that responsibility placed on me is something I really welcome and something I'm really excited about. I also think inadvertently, the tapes may, I think it wasn't the redistricting process that generated this, but I think the leak of what happened behind the scenes in the redistricting process and how odious those tapes were, I think that created a momentum around governance reform that I think can actually improve a city decision-making in a more comprehensive way. I think that generated real momentum around the issue of making redistricting in the future truly independent. I think it brought us potentially greater support for something like thinking about smaller council districts, where every single elected official pretty much in the city went on record in a poll from the LA Times saying that they support having more council districts in the city, which I think would be great, would be better. It paired with other governance changes, I think would be incredibly important for Los Angeles to move towards. Every single elected official talked about removing some level of discretionary power over land use, saying yes or no to particular housing units and certain kinds of investments in their own districts. They said that they wanted to take that away from individual council members. A lot of the things that have led to some of the shared challenges that we have today, now there is real momentum around making changes around those issues. And so, I want to say, I love this new district. Council District 4 is still the best council district in the city. And I think that the momentum around these changes will be it gives me a lot of hope for the future of Los Angeles. I put forward a motion in the wake of the tapes asking for an ad hoc committee on governance reform. That was constituted immediately. That's had its first meeting. And I'm hopeful that the proposals that we can discuss in that committee can get real traction in the council.
That's awesome. Thank you. Great outlook.
Over to you, Bubba.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Kyle, and thanks, Michael. And thanks for being here, Councilmember. So the committee assignments just came out, and we were super excited that you were added to both Public Works and Transportation, among others. Why did you decide to request those committees at this time, and what do you hope to accomplish in those?
Well, I'm excited about all of my assignments. And, I think part of what had happened over the first 2 years of my work was that I ended up doing a lot of legislative work or budget related advocacy around issues where I wasn't on the committee. I was doing a lot of budget related advocacy on getting more, for example, getting more active transportation dollars and positions allocated in DOT, which we were successful at doing. We increased the number of positions allocated to the department by a significant number, something like 18 or 20 positions were added, which was great. That was a result of our advocacy around that issue. We were doing a lot of advocacy around changing processes, around some of the public works processes that we've seen here in LA from our district. We interact a lot with some of these departments significantly. We've put in motions on the new bus shelter program, trying to kind of reform it and change it and make it successful, really set it up for success in the way that we want to see. And I think what we wanted to do was to really ensure that the places where we were doing all of this legislative and budget advocacy, as well as kind of program related advocacy in the district, were also places where I could actually sit on the committees and participate in those discussions. And I'm really excited that I was given an opportunity to do that. I think that one of the things that is also going to be exciting is a committee that you didn't mention, that I'm the chair of the new combined housing and homelessness committee. And I think that will also be hopefully will help us to think about some of these issues in a more holistic way.
Thank you. I think it's Josh next.
Yeah. Hi, Nithya. City Hall has seen a lot of changes since you were first elected. During the Healthy Streets LA ADEM Council, you stood up and said that you'd never seen so many people demanding safer streets. Then just a few months later, some conservative council members who have often blocked safe streets lost their election. And now there's a new group of council members that are progressive at council. You also have a council president that's not de facto blocking many of our efforts. How do you see the tone changing at council, and what opportunities do we have with the new crop of council members?
So, I am very, very excited about this new era at City Hall. And the changes are not just at the council. They're also, that we have a new mayor who's bringing a new sense of energy to this role. So I think there's a lot of changes that we're seeing in City Hall. It feels different from what it felt over the last 2 years, for sure. It's a palpable difference. There's a sense of possibility. There's a sense of change. I don't want to get too personal here, but I never understood when I got elected why there was so much territorialism and kind of territorialism and kind of this is my issue, you can't act on this issue, or conflict between council offices. Like, we all get elected from different council members, council districts, we're not in competition with each other. And yet there wasn't a sense of collaboration. There wasn't a sense of coalition. There wasn't a sense of shared goals in the building or around the horseshoe. And in the past few meetings, there are still, real differences between council members, for sure. But there is also a real sense of, let's find out where our shared common priorities are and let's work on those. Let's make sure that we're moving ahead on the things that we care about. Let's make sure that we're communicating. There's a lot more communication happening around shared issues of concern. All of that is really, really new. And I don't have that sense of, there's no other word for it. I was really lonely. I felt really lonely around the horseshoe, and I don't feel that way anymore. And actually the change it's not just that there's more progressive council members, there's just more willingness to communicate and collaborate overall, even if it's with people that you may not agree with on every policy issue. There is still more of an openness to being communicative and collaborative among that, which is really, really exciting. I hope that doesn't change as we move forward and learn more about each other and learn how to work with each other better. But already this feels palpably different from what was there before.
Thank you. That's really interesting. I think next is Michael.
So I was so impressed by your political courage last year when you endorsed Hugo Soto Martinez, a challenger to a sitting incumbent. This never happens. I don't think people realize how rare what you did is. How did you decide to make that decision despite potential political consequences if Mitchell Farrell had won? And do you have any advice for others to follow their heart, even if it's politically difficult or not aligned with their colleagues?
For me, the Echo Park Lake the clearing of Echo Park Lake that happened in March of 2021 was, I think created a rift between Mitch O'Farrell and myself that I just couldn't believe what had happened there. I couldn't believe that this was the approach that we took to homelessness. I could, and the reality about that moment, the reality about what had happened in Echo Park Lake is that it could have been a successful housing effort if there had just been a little more willingness to say, let's give people time to go indoors. Let's make sure that we're working on each individual by individual. Let's make sure that we're giving people the time to move from an encampment into a home effectively. This is not a radical new process. It was done at Oceanfront Walk. It was done in other locations. These geographically focused encampment to home efforts, which now the new mayor is doing through this new program, Inside Safe, more frequently across the entire city. Nothing about what they were doing there couldn't have been done in a way that would have been incredibly collaborative and positive for Los Angeles and how we approach homelessness. And instead, we did it in a way that militarized the process, that brought in hundreds of police officers, that had led to the largest number of arrests of journalists. I think 25% of arrests of journalists in the US happened on that night in Echo Park. And there was, for me, that was a point beyond which I could not stand, even if I was not always standing with my other council members on every issue, it just was a point, it was a line that I felt was just beyond the pale. And so endorsing Ugo, and Ugo is a fabulous person with an incredible story, and comes to this work through his deep values. And, you know, it was a no-brainer for me after that incident. And, I'm excited to see what happens in Council District 13. I'm excited to collaborate across our borders. We share so much border, and to collaborate across our borders to really do things the right way.
Thank you. Over to you, Adrian.
All right. Since the death of Andrew Gelmert, you took quick action to try to make Griffith Park safer, including the closure of Griffith Park Drive and commissioning a study with Kimberly Horn on long-term changes we can make to the park to make it safer for those who walk, jog, bike, ride horses, and use Griffith Park like a park instead of a way to bypass traffic on the 134 or the 5. What do you see happening in the next 2 years towards this goal? And what are your long-term aspirations for the park?
So I think we made some immediate changes, which I'm really excited about. We closed off that portion of Griffith Park Drive, which a lot of people were using to cut through from the 134 to the 5. So instantly that change reduced cut through traffic in the park. I think the goal of any and all future changes are really to think about how can we minimize the use of cars within Griffith Park for anything other than actually getting to the park and using the facilities in it, and to make it significantly safer for active transportation users of all kinds. And what we are doing is we have this study that has been commissioned with Kimberly Horn. Mehmet, when is that study completed, or is it already done?
They were at 90% plans just before the holidays, so it should be ready this month, is what we've been told.
And so we've done a lot of community engagement around that study. They went out there and talked to a lot of groups that are stakeholders in Griffith Park. And then we have $4 million at minimum from the state for implementation of improvements that Laura Friedman secured for us. And so we have the capacity now with the results of that study, and the study is going to include short, medium, and long-term changes. And I think it will also include changes that are going to be very low cost and straightforward to do, and then some changes which will require us to potentially use the funding that we have allocated for this from the state, but also to seek potentially other sources of funding, which will take a little longer for us to do. But I think the study will give us a roadmap for how we want to move towards those goals for Griffith Park. And I think there's a ton of enthusiasm for these changes. Our office is really enthusiastic about it, and we're going to continue to push this forward as quickly as possible. We've already, compared to many other projects at the city, this is moving significantly faster. It's made easier by the fact that Griffith Park is, and the roads in it are governed by a single department. It's RAP, Recreation and Parks, that governs it, right? So it makes it a little bit easier to take actions there. It makes it a little faster to take actions there than if you're dealing with city streets, where you have to deal with multiple agencies in order to move projects forward. So that gives us, I think, an advantage in being able to move fairly quickly once we get the results of the study back.
So the next question is regarding the Cahuenga Pass. It is the only reasonable connection between the city and the valley for people on bikes, and both Cahuenga West and Cahuenga East have bike lanes on the mobility plan. So there's also dead lanes at Barham, and Caltrans decommissioned a long time ago that could be used to make room for protected bike lanes. We're hoping that your office, working with both LADOT and Caltrans, could build the first protected bike lane between the city and the valley when Cahuenga West and Cahuenga East get resurfaced next year. And we would love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we're really excited about as well. I did want to say that, wherever we have had resurfacing happen in the city, our team has worked with Mehmet's leadership and Andrea's support and focus on it. That we have really focused on ensuring that anytime we have a resurfacing project, which overlaps with the mobility plan, that we're actually putting the bicycle infrastructure in place with it. And so we've done that on Riverside Drive. We did that on Burbank Boulevard. We did that on Hazeltine. And we're planning to do it in more places in the new year. We have an opportunity on Forest Lawn to do that. I believe next year. Is that right, Mehmet? That we'll have this opportunity come up?
This fiscal year.
This fiscal year. Oh my God. Yes, it's already 2023.
That's exciting.
Yes, so we'll have the opportunity to do that there. And our hope is, yes, to work on what we can on the Cahuenga Pass as well. So we'll keep you posted on when we think that opportunity will come up, where we'll need public advocacy to support it. But we're very committed to it, and it is on our priority list.
Thank you. And Olga, you got the last one.
Thank you. I have a kind of a deep wonky pull. So something that a lot of people don't know about you, unless they're nerds like us, is that you serve on the Air Quality Management District Board. It's kind of a mysterious board, but back in 2020, there was kind of a brief effort to get a ballot measure going through AQMD to fund Metrolink improvements, which was very interesting and unprecedented. Can you talk a little bit about some of the work you've done on AQMD, your long-term goals, as well as opportunities that you think we as advocates can take advantage of to do more radical work there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I was appointed to the AQMD, which governs air quality related to stationary sources across LA County and the surrounding region. It's made up of elected representatives from all over this region, as well as appointees from the governor. It is a little bit of a wonky appointment, but it can be quite impactful. So I want to talk about one thing that I did there, which I'm really excited about, which is so wonky, but is going to have transformative impacts on air quality here in LA County. And I would love to tell more people about this. And you started off with a very wonky question, so I'm assuming that you'd be interested in the perfect audience for this. So every few years, the AQMD puts forward the AQMP, the Air Quality Management Plan. And what the AQMD does on a regular basis is create rules around particular sources of emissions, right? So if you have something like a refinery, or if you have a new process for dry cleaners, or a car painting facility, we have rules that are in place for emissions that regulate emissions coming from all of those sources. The AQMP kind of governs it based on the EPA's regulations on where we have to get to in terms of emissions. It sets goals for different kinds of emissions and different places where we have to reduce emissions that are coming out in order for us to meet the EPA's standards for emissions. There is something in the AQMP which is called the cost effectiveness threshold. And what we noticed as we started off in the AQMP process, and I was working with my board consultant and looking through the materials for it, was that the cost effectiveness threshold, two things struck us about it. One was that the cost effectiveness threshold hadn't even risen with the cost of inflation over the past couple of AQMPs, right? So it was at $50,000, and it had been at $50,000 for quite a while. The second was that the cost effectiveness threshold actually kind of governed these rules in an implicit way, which meant that when you were putting a new rule on a source of emissions, the cost effectiveness threshold effectively said any intervention that would reduce emissions for that particular industry, any intervention that cost more than the cost effectiveness threshold wasn't really considered as part of the rulemaking, right? Does that make sense? So it wasn't that you couldn't do it. if you put in an intervention that costs more than the cost effectiveness threshold, all you had to do was to have a public hearing about it. But effectively, it served as a ceiling on what you could ask companies to invest in to reduce emissions, okay? So what we said was, hey, this cost effectiveness threshold looks pretty low, especially given how much we have to cut in terms of our emissions. And we said that I said that as a board member privately to the staff, and I also said that in public forums. The staff then came back to us with a new cost effectiveness threshold that took into account the health impacts of emissions, which is what the EPA does. And so now the cost effectiveness threshold is $300,000. And so that transforms rulemaking because it's going to enable us to ask companies to make more expensive interventions if needed in order to get to the level of emissions reductions that we need to get to. So that's kind of one of the interventions that I've made in my year on that on the AQMD that I'm very proud of. No one probably outside of this group of 72 people is going to be, I think, excited about that as much as I am. But that's the kind of work for emissions reductions that I think we have to do, just chipping away at our capacity to produce emissions at the rates that we have been doing in order to get air cleaner here.
Wow. Thank you for that explanation. That was a very wonky explanation, but very appreciated, I can tell by this group.
Yeah, were you able to follow it? I know it's a little, okay, good, great.
I think we got it. Yeah, thank you. I'm going to go to audience questions now. So the first one is from Natalia. From your perspective as an elected official, how can members of the public have the greatest and most impact to further progressive policies?
So I think that we obviously through participation in elections and kind of getting different people into office, I think we've seen now in multiple election cycles how impactful widespread interest in local elections can be in transforming who sits on this council and who makes policies on this council. But I do think that the forces that are allied against real change in LA are really strong, even now. And I think that it will take significantly more organizing for us to be able to overcome them. And I think hearing, going to organizing around council districts that may not be the, the traditional council districts that you go to for talking about these issues. Like, I think every council member can be moved on issues if they hear from enough constituents that they care about it. And so I think thinking about which council offices haven't heard from transportation advocates, active transportation advocates, which council offices are not hearing from their constituents who care about these issues and who want their districts to change in exactly the ways that everyone here wants the city to change, and targeting them, bringing more people into the fold in these areas in places where historically we haven't seen that kind of engagement with council offices. I think that could be very, very powerful. And I think that can really transform policy significantly.
Thank you. Next up from Jeffrey. Hi, I live in Silver Lake near Glendale and Rowena. I've been bugging Mehmet for over the last year. He says hi, to try to get info about bike lanes on Glendale Boulevard, which are supposedly coming this year. He sent screenshots, but why isn't this information public on BOE's website? I'm not sure if that's the right agency. Ditto for all projects. So I don't know if you want to answer that or if Mehmet wants to chime in.
Mehmet, I might need you to help me on this.
Yeah, that's not so sorry if I said anything that was confusing, and I know what Jeffrey's talking about. Basically, there is, as folks may know, there's the Glendale Hyperion complex of bridges. I don't want to get too much into the discussion of the deck of the bridge, although I think we have some things that we would like to see with that. But there's also a project that the Bureau of Engineering got Metro Call for Projects funding for, called the Intersections Improvement Project. This project would basically add bike lanes on Hyperion from Rowena to Ettrick on the west side, and then from Glen Feliz, to the bridge deck on the east side, and would put bike lanes on Glendale Boulevard from Rowena to Riverside, as well as expand the sidewalk that's there. So what we've been working on is trying to get BOE comfortable with separating that from the bridge deck. It's built into the as basically phase 3 of the work, so that everything on the bridge ends and then they do this. And we've been trying to ask them about separating it. So is there anything we can do first? Can we do, for instance, a road diet and bike lanes on Glendale Boulevard down to Riverside first? Just separate that out. That's what I shared with Jeffrey. Okay, and Jeffrey's saying, okay, good question on, but be that as it may, just to, yeah, I mean, different agencies handle their noticing differently, and BOE is not very good at it. I think DOT has made a lot of improvements that we should give them credit for in their livable streets website, which actually I think does do a good job of showing us the projects that are on, but BOE does not have something compatible. So from the standpoint of having them display their projects in a better way, it's a good point. But yeah, I don't know if that helps.
Thank you. The next question is from Luke. Matt, I don't know if that's going to be you as well. Could we please advance extending the Virgil Avenue bike lanes from Santa Monica North to and up along Hillhurst in Los Feliz? This has been on every single of the city's bike plans, but has not been implemented. Important north-south connector between Los Feliz and East Hollywood.
So, I mean, just broadly speaking, when people are bringing up bike lanes and reconfiguring streets around bike lanes, what we've been doing is when streets are up on the resurfacing cycle, that we've been implementing the bike lanes that were originally proposed, or trying to make them at a higher level, like more protected, et cetera. We have less capacity to bring investments on streets at this moment that are not already being slated for investments, just because the city has very limited dollars to do this. And so I think wherever there are plans to put in those lanes that are in the mobility plan or other places, I think we're going to be adhering to that when that street comes up for resurfacing. Does that answer the question there? Or
I think the question maybe was, aside from resurfacing, is there an opportunity to proactively change street design?
Does it need to be changed? I mean, meaning putting in new investments into that?
Probably scraping up the existing thermoplastic paint and then restriping, for example, outside of repaving.
Oh, okay. Potentially. I mean, it's something we could look into. Mehmet, I don't know if you have additional feedback here.
I mean, just from a couple of things. One is we do have we kind of have the maybe it's a larger question, but we do have the standards that BSS will not stripe, DOT will not stripe a bike lane on a street that has a certain pavement condition index. That's why a lot of this is tied to resurfacing. So if the condition of it already is low enough, it's just a kind of a non-starter with them. So to do a de novo facility, you have to get the resurfacing in. Now, does that mean it has to be the whole roadway? No, not necessarily. There could be opportunities for creative thinking that I don't think any of our departments have done before. So again, now we're talking about trying to stand up something completely new with them. We did get blast, which was good, but these are continual steps. The other thing I would say is that, yeah, it obviously raises to the top. In that area, we have some other commitments that have been brought to us by community members that we're focused on. So there is our own capacity that we want to make sure that folks in the community are, you're bringing to us everything you want to see. So we have the Los Feliz Boulevard Parkway cycle track planning and design work that the 4 million from the state will help fund. So once we get that money, BOE can initiate that task order and we can start that. And then we also have the Hyperion, the Fountain Hyperion Safety Committee project, where they want to take a look at Hyperion, where we just submitted for a state grant for that as well. So, you know, we have some things, but if people want to get Hillhurst into the mix and want to submit something more formal to us, it's something that we can balance. But we do want to be a little respectful of the DOT ATD, the Active Transportation Division planners process. They are trying to institute like a citywide prioritization scheme for all their projects and then tie that into BLAST. So there is some level of that we want to be a little deferential for. This first 2 years, we've been very fighting and clawing to get our investments because there hasn't been anything.
Yeah, and year one, we had almost no dollars. Like for when I first started, we were looking at a budget deficit, a pretty big one. And then it was only later that we got additional dollars. And then we were able to start thinking more holistically. And I think we want to do more. We've learned a lot after this kind of really active, year and change that we've had working on these with a lot of energy. And I'm hoping that we can do more of this stuff going forward.
Great. Let's see if we can get through a few more in the 5 minutes we have left. This is from Evan. I'm UCLA's undergrad representative to our local government. Students and faculty need a heavy rail alternative for Sepulveda with a station at UCLA to best facilitate connectivity with campus to CD4 and LA. What can we do to better advocate for the needs of students to elected representatives?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're doing is good. I think continuing so Metro is hearing really, really consistently from a few groups over and over again, like SOHA and the Sherman Oaks Homeowners Association, and whatever the name of the homeowners association is in Bel Air. And I think we just need to bring more voices that are raising their voices in this process consistently into the mix. And I do feel like there is an understanding. I do feel like there is an understanding of that there's real like what I said in the council discussion was true. Like, I do think that people are starting to realize how much of a public there is and how much of a constituency there is for public transportation investments and active transportation investments than ever before. And I think that's in part due to the work of Streets for All and this group of people, and how effective you've been at raising your voice and making sure that these issues are being heard. And I think continuing to do that, consistently doing that, and, unfortunately or fortunately, the way in which we've structured, unfortunately for the most part, I think the way we've structured our public engagement processes have made it hard for people who have a 9-to-5 job and a family to care for, from being able to participate. And although we're pushing for changes in how those participatory processes happen, I think continuing to engage as much as possible in the processes that exist will still be the best bet in making sure that we're getting the investments that we deserve.
Okay, see if we can do 2 questions in 2.5 minutes. Are you interested in being on the Metro board as one of the mayor's appointments?
It would be a dream. I'm already on the AQMD, which is a significant commitment already, and I'm on the transportation committee now, which is really exciting. I think it would be great and exciting, but I'm also conscious of just capacity and, the fact that I want to make sure that I'm serving my constituents and doing that constituent engagement as well. So I think if I'm tapped in for that, it's because they don't have, they may not have other people who are able to serve. So but I know that there's a number of people who are interested, and I'm hopeful that good people will get appointed.
I think this will probably be our final question. Can you talk about the Energy, Climate Change, and Environmental Justice Committee? Who will lead this in 2023? How will LA get funding to carry out this committee's goals? Will LA be able to get funding from the IRA to meet LA city goals? I'm not sure what IRA is, but maybe you know.
Yeah, what is the IRA? I'm sorry.
I don't know if this was asked anonymously, so whoever asked it wants to clarify, feel free.
So the committee chair is Katie Yaroslavsky, and the other members of the committee, I'm not sure exactly who's serving on it, but I'm on it, and I was excited by the other members of the committee. I will say that I think that environmental measures, especially things around kind of moving towards 100% clean energy and thinking about the LA 100 study and its implementation, these are things that have significant council support behind them, and that I think, you know, will continue to be a focus and priority of this committee. And yeah, I mean, I'm not sure we're going to need additional funding to meet our goals. Like the big thing for me as I think about our environmental goals going forward are twofold, in addition to our thinking about where our energy is coming from. One is thinking about we have a new regulations in place that will be coming into effect on April 1st that are asking for all new building construction to be electric, all electric, not connected to gas lines. We now have a bigger and more complex challenge, which is how do we decarbonize our existing building stock? How do we retrofit existing units? This is going to be challenging for a variety of reasons. I think adding to housing costs for people is absolutely unacceptable in Los Angeles. I don't want to put renters at risk of increased costs. So how do we do it in a way that keeps people in their homes, that doesn't raise housing costs, that makes sure that people who don't have the means to make these kinds of investments are still able to breathe clean air in their homes? That should be a right for every single person. And so I'm looking forward to taking on that challenge. We have good community groups that are mobilized and providing their input on how this happens safely and fairly. And I'm looking forward to finding a path forward, but also looking for and hopefully finding the resources to do this, because it's going to cost a lot for the city to be able to retrofit existing buildings. The second there is around water issues. And I think during this recent spate of rains, there's been more discussion of what we were actually supposed to use Measure W dollars for, which was to take and preserve our stormwater drain, our rainwater through our stormwater drain system, and really bring it back to being used in our local systems. We haven't quite made those investments yet. And so I think, to me, these are the things that the climate committee will have to take on as a priority, in addition to continuing the work on getting to 100% renewable energy by 2030, which is a goal that they've set out for themselves in the LA 100 study. And I think it's going to be a big task. I'm not sure where we'll get all the dollars for it, but I also know that both the federal government and the state government have made investments in climate resilience that they haven't made in the past. And oh, that's what it is. The IRA is the federal government program. Yes. There we go. Yes.
We are over time.
Dollars will be really useful.
We're over time. Any final words you'd like to leave us with?
It's a new day at City Hall. I feel really positive. I'm really excited to be here with all of you. I think there's a lot of momentum here in LA. I know this is a moment of low trust and faith in the capacity of elected representatives to do good and to do the right thing, and to work as hard as the city needs and deserves. But I do feel like we have more momentum towards that than I have felt in my 2 years here. And I'm really excited to continue working alongside you for our shared goals.
Well, on that very positive note, thank you so much for your time and for being a recurring guest at this point. And we're excited to stand behind you and get some stuff done in the next 2 years.
Absolutely.
All right. Have a good evening, everybody. Talk to you soon. Bye.